Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you about the new proposals coming in from Egypt and the mediators for a ceasefire in Gaza. Important positivity coming from Israel. We have a change of tone when it comes to the Israeli media. And we also have some developments happening in Syria that I wanted to talk to you about and share some important information about it. But we're going to start off with this ceasefire that we're talking about. So we had a delegation from Hamas going to Cairo, talking about a potential ceasefire. We have a new initiative coming from Egypt, and it's talking about a potential ceasefire with new potential proposals when it comes to Gaza. And I'm going to also get to the talk in the Israeli media that's changing when it comes to this ceasefire. So we had this report here that Hamas is sending a delegation to Cairo. Now, note, before Hamas is sending a delegation to Cairo, for the first time in many months, if not even the first time during the war, we had an Egyptian delegation going to visit Israel. Usually the mediation happens in Egypt or in other countries, but this time they went to Israel, something that signaled a level of progress when it comes to the ceasefire. So what are we talking about with this new proposal, and is it going to have anything significantly different than previous proposals, or is it simply an attempt coming from the mediators to build upon the previous ceasefire agreements for it to be sold, or for Israel to sell it as a new agreement, although it would include all of the demands of the Palestinian resistance? Because something is that's very important noting here, when it comes to the ceasefire, Hamas and the Palestinian resistance, they have not changed their positions when it comes to the ceasefire. They have been offered several temporary ceasefires that do not reach their demands and do not give them what they want in terms of basic demands for a ceasefire. And they did not accept them because they did not want to put themselves in the first circle they were in when they were in the temporary ceasefire before that Israel ended, and they restarted the war that we have now going for over 1 year and approximately 2 months. So we had this report here. An Egyptian source told Al Arabiya TV on Friday that Cairo has presented a new proposal for a ceasefire to the Gaza Strip, which has been subjected to Israeli aggression for more than a year. The source explained that the new proposal includes the gradual withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza in stages, noting that Cairo will send a security delegation to Tel Aviv this week to push efforts to resume ceasefire negotiations, meaning that the Egyptians are going to go to Israel yet again. And this is something that hasn't happened previously that much. Like I said, usually the delegations go to Egypt, and this is hinting that Israel is more open or showing more openness when it comes to a ceasefire in Gaza. The source added that the Egyptian proposal discusses forming a committee headed by the United States and with European and Arab participation to supervise the ceasefire. The new proposal was unveiled days after the United States announced that it would begin new efforts with Qatar, Egypt, Turkey to revive the ceasefire negotiations in Gaza. And now Hamas is sending a delegation. Bassem Naim told Reuters that the delegation will arrive to Cairo tomorrow, Saturday, to continue with the talks. After the agreement in Lebanon, Hamas confirmed that it was concerned with Israel stopping the aggression within the nationally agreed upon parameters for stopping the aggression, namely a ceasefire, the withdrawal of the occupation forces, the return of the displaced, and the completion of a real and complete prisoner deal. And Netanyahu said that the conditions for reaching a possible agreement to release Israeli prisoners in Gaza Strip had become much better. Again, positivity coming from the Israeli prime minister, the same man who was insisting on not stopping anything up until he completely eliminates the Hamas. What's different about this? Well, nothing substantially when it comes to the actual contents of the ceasefire, because the United States itself, the administration, they adhere to the demands of the Palestinian resistance. And they said, Joe Biden accepted a ceasefire. There was a proposal coming from Benjamin Netanyahu as well back in May that included total submission to the Palestinian demands because they haven't changed. But what's changing now is they're probably going to have small little details that would change when it comes to the execution. And one thing that's significant is the participation of Turkey. Hamas previously stated that they would like Russia, China, and Turkey to be added as mediators because the official Turkish position when it comes to the Palestinian cause is more supportive verbally and by some actions when it comes to the Palestinian side. Of course, there are disputes when it comes to certain actions and them not reaching the levels of statements we are hearing from Turkey and certain things on the ground that sometimes contradict these statements. However, that was a Hamas demand, and we saw participation coming from Russia in Lebanon, and they could be introduced at some point when it comes to the ceasefire in Gaza as well, although not adhering to the demands of the United States and Israel when it comes to cutting the supply lines of Hezbollah from Syria, something that we will be talking about shortly when I begin talking about the new developments happening in North Syria, primarily in Aleppo. So, Israel is showing positivity. The prime minister himself is showing that there is positivity, saying that the conditions for reaching a possible agreement to release Israeli prisoners had become much better. This is something new coming from Benjamin Netanyahu. And also, and that's very important, the tone coming in the Israeli media. The Israeli media, I shared with you some interviews in the last couple of days with the Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, with one of the far-right channels in Israel, Channel 14, that support Netanyahu heavily, and them talking about the timing and the fact that it's now relevant to reach a ceasefire with Gaza after they had a ceasefire with Lebanon. Again, in line with what I personally assumed a couple of months ago that Netanyahu would do, which is escalate slightly with Lebanon to reach a ceasefire and then climb down the ladder, have a momentum of a ceasefire, a vibe of a ceasefire, despite criticism coming from left and right against these ceasefires and the fact that they haven't accomplished anything substantial when it comes to Israel. But that is happening. And we also have analysts from senior Israeli newspapers talking about the time is very now suitable and it's important to have a ceasefire. This is an opportunity that should not be missed. One of the senior analysts in the Israeli newspaper website, Ynet, an opportunity that should not be missed is it is possible to reach a settlement in Gaza and release the abductees. And parts of it included the regulation outline in the north should serve as a basis for the agreement in the south. It will be implemented in 3 stages. The release of the abductees, the establishment of an alternative civilian administration in Gaza, and a permanent ceasefire with tough security arrangements. This will oblige the leadership in Israel to abandon the resolute opposition to the presence, even a symbolic one, of the Palestinian Authority in the Strip and the adherence to the total annihilation of Hamas. Again, things that are open for interpretation and don't have clear definitions, something that Israel always does when it climbs down the ladder and starts to submit to the will of the people who oppose it. In particular, when it comes to the presence of the Palestinian Authority, without describing which Palestinian Authority, because we have 2 of them, and neglecting the objective of the total annihilation of Hamas, which is in effect an admission that they are unable to defeat the Hamas, making it an admission of defeat. And these statements are becoming more and more mainstream now in Israel. The talk about the ceasefire becoming something necessary. Now it's time to end it in Gaza. Even the people who are opposing Benjamin Netanyahu are saying that, well, we had a ceasefire in Lebanon. It's not great, we haven't achieved everything, but it's more pressing now to have a ceasefire in Gaza, because that's where we actually have prisoners of war rather than Lebanon. In Lebanon, we don't have prisoners of war. We have prisoners of war in Gaza, and it's important to reach a ceasefire with Gaza. Which leads me to the second thing that I wanted to talk to you about. We had a declaration of a campaign coming from certain elements with what is labeled the Syrian opposition, called the deterrence of aggression. A campaign called the deterrence of aggression. And we had a couple of reports talking about this campaign, but I will do my best to try and cover parts of it in the next couple of days as well, alongside relevant developments, of course, in West Asia and globally too. But this is very significant because it came in a very suspicious timing. And I will get to the reconciliation process and the de-escalation and the Astana meetings in a second. But before that, I'll share with you some of the details when it comes to the actual operation. So, as stated, some of these movements in Syria who oppose Bashar al-Assad and his government, they launched an operation called the Deterrence of Aggression. The leader of the Military Operations Department affiliated with the Syrian opposition factions, Ahmad Dalati, said today that the Deterrence of Aggression operation came in response to the criminal behavior of the Syrian regime during the recent period to deter it and to preserve people's lives. On Wednesday, the Syrian opposition factions launched a military operation called Deterrence of Aggression, during which they were able to take control of important villages in addition to the 46th Regiment, which is one of the largest military units in the western Aleppo countryside and was under control of the opposition until February 2020. Since Wednesday dawn, the opposition factions have been able to control nearly 70 towns and military points of the regime in the countryside of Aleppo and Idlib. And okay, we have this operation now, primarily according to the opposition, as a response to the criminal behavior of the Syrian regime during the recent period to deter it and preserve people's lives. What we have seen in recent times is actually de-escalation. This is why, this is where questions start to arise about this operation itself. We had de-escalations coming and talks between Turkey and Syria and Russia. As a matter of fact, we've had in that area where there is now, where there is an escalation now, we have had a de-escalation zone. Aleppo was considered to be a zone of de-escalation based on the Syrian peace process that took place in Astana. So, what is exactly happening? We were talking about Turkey reaching out, the Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan not ruling out meeting with President Bashar al-Assad, certain elements with the Syrian opposition talking about reconciliation. We've had over 12 years of the conflict in Syria, with the situation not changing dramatically apart from the massive shift that was in favor of the Syrian government post-2015. At one point, the opposition was moving towards Damascus, but then the Syrian government hit back. And of course, the the side supporting the Syrian government as well. And on each side, we have people supporting them. In 2012, certain attempts started with Arab League peace process, and then we had informal talks, proposals by Moscow. That's before the intervention of Russia. Some people offered Assad to step down. At one point, Western powers backing the Syrian opposition were confident that Bashar al-Assad was about to go down. Then there were other attempts throughout 2012, reaching up to the Geneva II Convention in 2014, with the United Nations participation and some mediators from Arab countries too. And then we had Astana in 2015. Astana in 2015 was the first meeting in Astana that led to the second one between 2015 and 2019 and 2020. We had also Geneva III, cessation of hostilities, Lausanne talks, alongside another Geneva Convention, and Sochi. But many of them, again, they were not very successful for various reasons. Parts of the opposition that showed disunity from day one. There were many conflicts within the Syrian opposition, backed by many countries that had varying differences in interest in Syria, some from Saudi Arabia, some from Qatar, some Turkey, some of the Kurdish movements, and of course the United States, NATO, Western countries as well, and then Israel we have in the picture. That caused a lot of disunity between the opposition movements in Syria, and some of them were not present, and that caused a big problem. If you have a side that is opposing the government and you don't really know who you want to talk to, that causes a problem when it comes to the implementation. Now, the most significant development when it comes to the peace process in Syria came in 2019, when delegations of Turkey, Iran, and Russia arrived to Astana in December 2019, and they weren't very successful with a ceasefire proposal. But then we started to have success following 2020 and 2021. We had a joint statement at the time from Russia, Iran, and Turkey reaffirming their stance to oppose separatist plans aimed at undermining a unified Syria. That was an exceptionally important development, because at the time, and to this day, Turkey was still backing certain areas that were under opposition control in Syria. And of course, we had other areas controlled by American-supported groups. And when it comes to Turkey, we have coordination between Turkey and the United States. And then there's, of course, Israeli participation in some of these cases too. In 2021, the parties basically held this agreement very well. And it lasted for 4 years almost. This peace process lasted for 4 years. And finally, we had countries who were talking about solving the problem, opposition movements coming forward, the Syrian government showing openness as well, because of course the war in Syria had many casualties on sides supporting the government and sides against the government. And it has been a conflict that took many lives, that could have ended way before. However, there were certain countries who were only interested in escalating the tensions and the problems in Syria for their own agendas. And these people oppose Syria and the Syrian people as a whole. By the way, they might take sides or act as if they care about this person rather than that person. But what they're actually after is taking down Syria as a state because of certain positions that Syria took as a country that were in opposition to the plans of the United States hegemony in the region. And of course, we've had a massive campaign of propaganda that pushed sectarian violence and a sectarian narrative. And unfortunately, that still exists to this day. Now, these people who push for the sectarian narrative and only support the causes in Syria based on the side of their choosing, they only support it on a sectarian basis. They do not support it based on a human rights base or on an equal base, because they would view certain things happening on one side and have a blind eye towards what's happening to the other side. So if we had a peace process, that's just to elaborate, because of course with the Syrian conflict, there's a lot to talk about. We've had 12 years when it comes to the Syrian conflict, and there have been many developments. But the most significant development now is the development after we had the Astana process starting to take place post 2020. So we've had 4 years of relevant de-escalation. Of course, there were tensions here and there in some parts. That's undeniable. But there was a vibe of de-escalation, and even the Arab League, again, opening its arms to Syria. Then we have the tensions reducing massively, or at least by, talks when it comes to Syria and Turkey. Turkey played a very big role when it comes to what's happening in Syria. What happened now? What's the problem? Well, 15 hours before the escalation in Syria, Benjamin Netanyahu had a speech. Benjamin Netanyahu had a speech that I shared with you a couple of days ago, in which he warned Bashar al-Assad. He said, Bashar al-Assad, you're playing with fire. Why is he warning Bashar al-Assad? Because Bashar al-Assad and his government, Syria, has been a key player when it comes to supporting the resistance. And the supply line of Hezbollah comes primarily from Syria. Syria has the biggest borders with Lebanon. And as a matter of fact, the Lebanese resistance started from the Beqa' Valley. The Beqa' Valley on the eastern part of Lebanon has been the place where Hezbollah started to receive the funding, the weapons, the arms, and the training coming from Syria. So I wanted to share this map with you just to elaborate further clarify what's happening and what are the reasons for what's happening. So this is Syria, and I mean, this map is being updated now. We have the they're calling it here in this map Turkish occupation, US occupation, Syria and Israeli occupation. But when it comes to Turkish occupation, you of course have opposition movements that are mostly funded by Turkey. Here, opposition movements that belong to mostly Kurdish movements and supported by the United States. And of course, the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights. But primarily when it's green, you're talking about Turkey. Orange, you're talking about the United States. And this map is now changing in this area here that I'm pointing at. That's called Aleppo. The second, if I'm not mistaken, biggest city in Syria, a very significant city. The opposition took control of it at one point. The Syrian state took back control at around 2020. And then now we have this campaign. There is something significant when it comes to Aleppo. What is it? Aleppo has a road called the M5. North to Aleppo, we have a road called the M4. And from Aleppo down to the Jordanian borders, and they usually call it the Aleppo-Damascus road, it's called the M5. The opposition made it no secret that they are trying to control the M5. And now they are getting close to certain parts of the M5 in this area around here. Now the forces are stretching up to the area surrounding Aleppo. There have been some videos released of them in Aleppo physically. And again, we're having disputes of the authenticity when it comes to how genuine they are when it comes to Syria. But what is the reason for them wanting to control the M5? Well, it's one of the key roads when it comes to Syria. And if they start taking control of the M5, that means they are taking control of one of these main roads that could later go down to Damascus and the Jordanian borders and literally choke this whole area that stretches to Lebanon. They can begin by choking it from the north towards this area and not allowing any access when it comes to Syria to Lebanon from the north, from Tripoli and these areas. And then they can continue down south, reaching a Suwaida area up to the Jordanian borders. If they succeed in that, and of course with any military operation, it begins with limited locations, and then it starts to stretch further. And the opposition movements in Syria have made it no secret that they want to, what they call, liberate all of Syria. So they're not just talking about a limited campaign, they are talking about all of Syria once again. And the question arises again, why now? Why now when we had a period of de-escalation? And what is the purpose of claiming that you want to liberate all of Syria, not just having even certain tensions in a location like Aleppo, for example, to further expand the territories that are under your control? If they do that, and if they begin to choke or take control of the M5, they will take down all of this part, in effect, choking Lebanon. So Lebanon will have no supply from the Syrian government. And again, the Syrian government and Syria as a state, they are the biggest supporters when it comes to logistics, weapons, and arms to Hezbollah. That is something that is undeniable. So we're talking about a very big campaign. Is it a coincidence that this campaign came 15 hours after Benjamin Netanyahu's speech, during which he threatened the Syrian president and the Syrian government? I find it difficult to believe that. And I find it difficult to believe that for various reasons. The first reason is, well, elements within, and I am going to try and be as objective as possible, by the way, elements of the Syrian opposition thanked Benjamin Netanyahu when he was attacking Lebanon. Elements of the Syrian opposition wrote thank you boards to Benjamin Netanyahu and published them. Elements within the Syrian opposition came on Israeli media. Elements of the Syrian opposition were treated in Israel. Israel does not consider the Syrian opposition to be terrorists. They consider them to be fighters, although some of these fighters belong to ISIS and movements that, well, you'd be surprised why Israel would call them as such. So if you're thanking Netanyahu, if certain elements within your movement have direct engagement with Israel, open engagement, they're making no secret of it, thanking Israel for assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and for attacking Lebanon, then what makes us think that they would not necessarily receive support from them or coordinate with them? And when we talk about Israel, we're not just talking about Israel. We're talking about the United States. We're talking about NATO. And there is a very big involvement from Turkey in all of this, because many things that are happening are being facilitated in Turkey. And now we have an outright admission coming from Turkey that this is only going to be a limited operation. Again, indicating that there is direct Turkish involvement. Why now? That's another question. Why now? A minute after, literally, moments after the declaration of a ceasefire in Lebanon, during which Hezbollah showed massive capabilities of continued attacks on Israel, even with the big blows that they received in the form of the assassination of their Secretary General for the sake of Gaza, the displacement of almost 1 million people for the sake of Gaza, the destruction of tens of thousands of buildings for the sake of Gaza. And then thankfully we had a de-escalation in Lebanon, and things are looking like they are improving. And of course we do hope that they do. They want to choke Hezbollah and reduce this capability. Because although Hezbollah, they have their own production lines in Lebanon, they are, again, very dependent on the support that they get from Syria. And it's not only that. We have direct foreign intervention. We have Ukrainian presence with the opposition in Syria. We have Turkish presence. We have Uzbeki presence. And we have people from other countries too fighting with the opposition. For what exactly? And what is the motive for them? Now, many of these people are, again, basing their whole campaign and presence in Syria on sectarian matters. And although there were some reassurances coming from figures in the Syrian opposition that we are, we're not targeting, we want to make everyone safe, we want to keep people safe, evidence on the ground was showing some of their fighters, talking in a very sectarian tone, and they did not seem to appear very friendly or non-hostile, right, or open to the multitude, the multiple faiths that exist in Syria, and the ethnicities that exist in Syria, and again, without a very clear vision. All of a sudden, we want to stop this aggression, an aggression that, hasn't been very visible because, like I said, we've been through a peace process. And simultaneously, or shortly after, the statement of Benjamin Netanyahu, coming that he is warning Bashar al-Assad and the Syrian state from their continued support for Hezbollah, simultaneously with his talk about a ceasefire in Lebanon. I do not believe that these things are not connected together. It is very unlikely. It's a very unlikely case. And judging by who some of these elements in the Syrian opposition are supported by, it is exceptionally unlikely that the decisions that are made and the movements that are made and the timing that is chosen is completely independent. We're talking about an escalation following a slight de-escalation to cut the supply lines of the Lebanese resistance, and the people who are supporting, or the countries or powers that are supporting the splitting and taking down the government, or what they claim to be the taking down of the government in Syria, are not doing that to take down the government in Syria and to support the Syrian people. They are doing that for their own colonial projects in Syria that aim to tear the Arab and Muslim countries apart. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you in this live stream. I'll open the space up for some of your participation. And again, thank you so much for everyone for tuning in. Glenn Huxley and Munzer Shihab, thank you so much for your supers, much appreciated. And thank you everyone for tuning in again for another live stream. If you have any questions, by the way, if you wouldn't mind just highlighting them for me, just so that we don't miss them. Infinite Content, Mahmoud, have the ceasefire plans include any plans for international media to enter into Gaza? Well, if there would be a de-escalation in Gaza, and we would have an open border primarily from Egypt, then that's where most likely you will have international reporters coming in. Israel isn't very keen on allowing anyone from the Israeli side because they don't want them to show what's actually happening inside of Gaza. The only time we have seen foreign news agencies going into Gaza were on these IDF tours in Gaza, where they will ride a military vehicle and receive the typical propaganda in areas that the Israeli side would want them to be in. And Ramplans, you also asked, liberate all of Syria from whom? And I think that's a very valid question. Liberate all of Syria from whom? Exactly. Syria has Syrian people. And again, we're having a talk for reconciliation. So why all of a sudden, when you know that this campaign failed for 12 years, why all of a sudden escalate and go against agreements you had in place for 4 years when it comes to de-escalation, and especially following statements coming from the Turkish side about a de-escalation and even potential meetings with heads of state between Syria and Turkey. Something is very suspicious out of all of this. And Jimmy, as you said, Mahmoud, do you think this uprising is being done sneaky by Turkey, US, Israel to try and take over Syria and weapons to supply to Hezbollah? I very much think that, or a big part of the reason is indeed that, alongside other reasons as well. And that's why I said that in the ending statement of my video. The countries that are in line together now all of a sudden in Syria, well, their names, they will tell you exactly what they're about. If you combine Israel, if you combine Turkey with Ukraine, with NATO, with the United States, what do you get? And what were these people's positions in other conflicts? What did they do exactly? And the bigger problem that we have in Syria, by the way, is the strength of the propaganda from the Arab and Muslim side, by the way. The Arab and Muslim propaganda when it comes to Syria is beyond imagination. The levels of propaganda, the level of sectarianism that is sometimes being pushed. And again, the surprising thing is that we had a period of de-escalation and potential peace talks to once and for all solve this in Syria for the sake of all of the Syrian people, regardless of who they are. And all of a sudden, you have a campaign called the deterrence of the aggression. The deterrence of the aggression. And that was from Jimmy. Thank you so much, Jimmy, for that. Paul Ambrose, Mahmoud, do you think the Turkish people support Erdogan? Well, I think he has support, of course, by many people in Turkey, but his support has been declining, as we have seen with recent elections. Less majorities, hardly losing some of the main municipalities in Turkey. And usually when you talk about elections, you're talking about, a massive poll or referendum from the people and their approval. I think part of that is due to the fact of the length he remained in power. And again, when it comes to Erdogan, he has done certain things that initially have been positive for Turkey. But the change of the system to a presidential system in Syria, that really had a half and half split between the people of Turkey, led him to become the president for many people in Turkey. No other prime minister or president apart from Erdogan. And I don't think that that's something that is very healthy when it comes to a country for one man to be in power for the whole time, basically. So, of course, there is support. There is undeniable support for Erdogan, but I also think that this support is declining. And I mean, in the past year, even if we talk about his positions when it comes to Gaza, he has received a lot of criticism. He has received a lot of criticism, primarily from the level of statements he made when compared to the actions that he implemented on the ground, including certain actions, well, which include directly dealing with a country committing a genocide and war crimes, and that is run by modern-day Hitler, as he himself called him, Netanyahu. These things raise a lot of criticism, to a level where Erdogan had to defend himself recently on a tweet on X, saying, all of those who call us traitors, or me personally, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know our support for the resistance in Gaza, and when other countries are not supporting Anna. And of course, again, they have made certain statements to support the Palestinians' right to resist and other things too. However, like I said, when it comes to certain statements and actions on the ground, we haven't seen a link. We haven't seen a link. As a matter of fact, we've seen things that are opposing. So, for example, Turkey had a ship holding Israeli weapons after it went from Egypt, again, another shameful act, to Turkey, a country committing war crimes, right? And even after we had the report of Turkey cutting all ties with Israel, we still had them having ties with Israel. And Sean Hurl, thank you, said True Promise 3 ASAP, please. Yeah, True Promise 3, it's pending. Marvin, do you see Jordan experiencing the same game as Syria, create a buffer around Zioland, knock out Syria, Jordan, and then choke out Hezbollah? Well, so long as you have someone very compliant, there is no big motive to change it necessarily. Now, this compliant partner in Jordan, he might think that he could be safe from any aggression or hopes of an expansion. He is very delusional to think that, although he is trying to prove how faithful he is by taking down some of the Iranian missiles, openly declaring it, aiding a genocidal entity committing war crimes through land by trying to give them an alternative route to the sea that was blocked by Ansarullah. He's trying to do all of that to prove that, no, I am faithful. I am indeed very supportive of you. I am aligned to you. I abide by you. I follow everything that you tell me, to prove how dedicated he is to the security of the criminal entity. Is that going to protect him? Not necessarily. Why? Because we still see Jordan as part of the greater Israel. They always had plans with Jordan. And the massive ethnic cleansing campaign planned for the West Bank, where are they going to go to exactly? They will be going to Jordan. Benjamin Netanyahu himself believes that Jordan is the homeland for the people acting like they are Palestinian, because there are no Palestinian people, according to Netanyahu and co. The people who came from Poland and Ukraine and Belarus and Russia and Hungary just a couple of decades ago, and changed their names. And I hope that clarifies. Thank you, Marvin. Bob Marston, good evening, Mahmoud. Speaking of the HTS attack in Syria, the Middle East observers observing that a second wave of exploding pages went off in Syria Tuesday. this would point to Israeli involvement. Yes, thank you for bringing that up. The reason I haven't mentioned the pager attack is that there was no solid verification of it. And there were some who disputed it, saying that the people who were recording these videos pretended to be people in the Syrian army. Syria did not declare it outright. And there was a notion that this could have been potentially intended to create a panic and destroy communication lines within Syria. Now, mind you, well, Syria was already facing a pager attack when Lebanon was facing a pager attack. Do you remember? The reports were that some Iranian officials, members of the IRGC, were wounded, or some of them were killed as well in the pager attacks in Syria that happened simultaneously with Lebanon. So they've already faced that pager attack. That means that they would have had to take precautionary measures. And seeing as we had no confirmation that this was indeed a pager attack similar to what happened before simultaneously in Lebanon and Syria, that means it could be fake news. And that's the reason that I haven't really mentioned it. Now, if we have something to confirm it, something solid, well, coming from the side that has been affected by it, then we would say that, because at the time it was reported from Syrian sources, directly, that they had this pager attack, and it was used by Israel at the time. Brother Mahmoud, what about Russia? They were keen helping Syria in the past. Yes, they have. Firstly, because they have historical ties with Syria. They have a military base in Syria. They have a port in Syria that belongs to them. And from a Russian perspective, they view this as in the bigger picture. They don't view it from a small lens like some of the people who just randomly support anything pushed at them from mainstream media. If someone throws a sectarian phrase or freedom and that's it, and let's follow suit. No, Russia views it from a bigger perspective. Russia views it as an American attempt to take down an ally of ours. They have seen it happening before. They tried to skip it in certain locations. It happened. They saw it happening in Iraq. They saw it happening in Libya. And they started seeing an American expansion in the region in the favor of Israel and against core Russian allies. That's why not only Russia, but also China participated too. But Russia participated in a more clear manner and with more involvement on the ground. And the Russian participation flipped things around. They thwarted all of the American attempts and all of the American movements operating under different banners. The Islamic State, ISIS, whatever it is. So they changed the equation, which led to the paths of de-escalation that followed. And that's why what happened now was extremely suspicious, choosing to have an escalation internally in a country that you share with your other citizens when you have a peace process going on. And when we were due to see certain de-escalations that we hoped would reach to, finally, a genuine peace process in Syria and healing and rebuilding. And, of course, more democratic processes happening in Syria and more reform happening. But again, some countries have other plans. And those on the ground, they are sold for any reason, like they are sold for any other reason in other battles as well, in other conflict zones too. That was from Ari Magoo. And Alan, thank you so much. He said, Mahmoud, if Hizb, the bros of North Litani Lib army moves in, sounds like a buffer zone. How will Syria hit back and will the US bases be attacked? The resistance in Lebanon coordinates with the Lebanese army. The resolution 1701 was there from 2006, and from 2006 up until now, we had Hezbollah in the south, and well, we have people from the south in the Lebanese army too, and we also had Hezbollah arming itself. Now, what they don't want to tell you, by the way, is that this is an agreement of submission coming from Israel to Hezbollah. Because why, when Israel was always saying before, we don't have faith in the Lebanese government, they are the ones who are responsible, we need to be present to make sure, we don't trust the other. Why all of a sudden a change? Because you want to climb down the ladder. The Lebanese resistance will remain in the south because the Lebanese resistance liberated the south. There would be no south without a Lebanese resistance, and it would be no buffer zone. It would be a zone that is purely Lebanese, with the Lebanese army and with the Lebanese resistance coordinating, present, and preparing for the coming days against the war criminal state. And how will Syria hit back, and will the US bases be attacked? Well, the US bases have started to be attacked from several days. They have been attacked since the 7th of October. They started to be attacked. The US withdrew from 1 or 2 bases in Syria as well. And I believe that Syria will hit back by targeting the key lines of these forces in Aleppo and in the areas leading to Aleppo. And we already have attacks in Idlib as well, which is a hub that is under the control of the opposition in Syria, supported by Turkey because of its geographical borders or closeness to Turkey. And news column, do you think Syria will change Iran's plans for True Promise 3? Listen, I think Iran's True Promise 3 depends on one main thing. Based on the statements coming from Iran, a response is coming, whether or. Whether or what? Whether or we have or we don't have a ceasefire altogether now in Gaza. They saw the progress in Lebanon. They will probably see if this gets translated in Gaza. We have more talks about a prospect of a ceasefire in Gaza, more positivity from Israel, more mainstream media preparing the public opinion to accept the ceasefire. Benjamin Netanyahu saying that the conditions have now ripened to reach a ceasefire in Gaza, or get our prisoners back instead of having a ceasefire, because he's someone who doesn't want to be seen as climbing down the ladder or being humiliated. That's the last thing that they want, and to do that they would use different types of things to describe what they're doing. And mind you, the other side as well might not declare all of what they received to make it work. And I gave you examples before of previous escalations with Gaza, when Israel indeed handed Hamas things that they didn't have before, like the elimination of buffer zones, expanding the control of Hamas in Gaza, expanding the sea operations or fishing areas when it comes to Gaza. All of these things are important. So even if we do have a ceasefire in Gaza sometime soon, you might not necessarily see all of the accomplishments that have been given to the Palestinians all at once, because that would be a very big PR blow to Israel. And again, to make it work, they would probably not declare. All of them, like certain things, were not declared when it comes to Lebanon. You need to read between the lines to understand what each side is getting. And if you are, you need to be able to see that what happened now is an exceptionally large blow to Israel and Lebanon, jumping off the ladder, not climbing down the ladder from Israel. And True Promise 3 will be depending on the potential of ceasefire. with Gaza. Now, if we do have a ceasefire, Iran might say we will have a response. It wouldn't be very, very significant, but we will have to have a response. If we do not have a ceasefire, then we will see a full fat response, right? Not a semi-skimmed. But in Syria, I think it might play a role. I do not think that they necessarily expected this move from the opposition now. And this move from the opposition now at this timing is extremely suspicious, and even raises questions for people who were supportive of them, to be fair. Stephen, has all the aid from Egypt border been destroyed? There is nothing going on from the Egypt border because Israel took control of it, and the Egyptian side does not want to deal with an Israeli control on the Philadelphia corridor and the Rafah crossing, because to them that would create a precedent where they agree to an Israeli presence in the Philadelphia corridor. Unfortunately, the Palestinian people suffer more because of that, and Egypt decided to do that, or the Egyptian government, instead of actually taking action against an occupying war criminal entity on their borders. Let alone the lack of action when it comes to the genocide just happening next door. So the aid coming in is only coming in from checkpoints or crossings that are completely controlled by Israel. In many cases, they are destroyed. The Hamas forces and in Gaza are coordinating with certain movements to secure some of this aid, because the Israeli army was handing the aid to criminal gangs in Gaza who used to steal it and then resell it at exceptionally high prices, increasing the already catastrophic situation in Gaza. And Gelliberg, again, you're asking me if Iran will increase the level of response because of what's happening in Syria. That is an option. That is absolutely an option. Because, again, from an Iranian perspective, firstly, Syria is a key player. They are exceptionally important. And they're viewing this as like a counter move to the ceasefire that just happened in Lebanon. Right? But I think the priority would be to deal with the situation internally in Syria. That would, again, be exhausting their forces in Syria and using more of their forces in Syria. That would work in the favor of Israel and the United States to keep them busy there. But that might lead them to do something bigger against Israel in Operation True Promise 3. A new column, do you think that the timing of this could indicate that Israel is very weakened right now and they are worried about a counterattack through the Golan Heights from forces in Syria, Iraq? I believe that the situation when it comes to the Golan Heights, there have been some underlying understanding there between Syria and Israel. And the operation to do with the Golan Heights would have only been a case where we would have something that is all out, open front completely with no limits. So we have had attacks on the Golan Heights in the past year, and Israel constantly attacks in Syria. However, again, Syria is having this internal situation that they have to deal with. That is taking a lot of resources from them, of course. And they're constantly trying to take down fires. And again, we were reaching a stage where we had a de-escalation. There was a peace process, primarily after Astana 2019. Turkey, funnily enough, who is the primary supporter, as in logistically, to these movements in the north west of Syria, said that we are indeed looking to, that's it, reach a peace process, keep Syria a united country, not divided, because the division of Syria was a big player when it comes to US interests. And Erdogan said, I'm willing to meet with the Syrian president himself. So all of a sudden they have to deal with that again. And the primary objective is to keep them busy inside, and also eventually lead to cut the line, cut the M5, the Syrian M5 from Lebanon, because it crosses all of the geographical area from West Syria towards East Lebanon and the Beqa Valley, and from the north as well. But the eastern border of Lebanon is more important. And again, they're going to have to work really hard to reach there. It's not like it's going to happen in the next weeks or something. But again, that's a threat, because you're having statements from these movements conducting these operations in Syria that they want to liberate all of Syria, meaning that they are looking to get to South Syria, up to potentially Suwaida area, to the Jordanian borders, and that's it, have full control. And someone's asking me about if Syria, Marvin, if Syria is part of the BRICS. They're not part of the BRICS. If they made an application, I am actually not sure, because there are certain parameters you need to have. But that's why you have the BRICS Plus now and pending kind of approvals to join the BRICS. They are not. I think they would, of course, be interested in, but they would have to solve the problems that are happening internally, that are now being ignited again. Stephen, how are friends Houthi doing? Well, Abdul Malik al-Houthi had a speech a couple of days ago, or yesterday actually, in which he stated the supporting front is continuing here, normal, no ceasefire here. He congratulated Hezbollah for the ceasefire in Lebanon, but he said, we don't have a ceasefire. We're going to continue supporting Gaza up until the genocide ends and the siege is lifted. Both of these conditions. And we had similar statements coming from Iraq, who said that we do not have a ceasefire. And that led Israel, because Netanyahu was only claiming afterwards, before that, that Hamas is now secluded. So all of a sudden you had these statements, and then later Israel started to say, oh no, they're just supporting Hamas, they're not supporting Hezbollah. Ansarullah and Iraq. Not as if it relates to the genocide happening by a war criminal entity with a war criminal heading it, who is wanted for the ICC. Juino, how does the occupation of northern Gaza factor into a ceasefire? I would assume that there is no common ground between the sides on this issue. Israel is preparing the ground for settlements in Gaza. The levels of changes that they are making in North Gaza, the fact that they had what is called the Genocide General's Plan in North Gaza, starving the population, forcibly expelling them and murdering and slaughtering them with barbaric massacres beyond Satan's imagination. They have plans to build houses and complexes that would be purely Zionist Jewish over the bodies of the butchered Palestinian infants, children, and innocent people, because they want to have a bigger Jewish majority across occupied Palestine. But that's unlikely to happen. Why? Because they're still facing immense resistance in the north, in the most northern parts. I mean, Beit Lahia, Jabalia. What the Palestinian resistance is doing is beyond anyone's imagination in North Gaza. Even when you base it on previous events, the level that they are doing, taking into consideration the tremendous, brutal barbarism that is being inflicted on them and on the civilian population, is beyond comprehension. Israel would not be able to deal with that. And there are people in Israel who know that very well. Those who are pushing for all of this expansionism are delusional fascists. Delusional. And I mean, listen, these people are so racist and arrogant that they become totally ignorant and imbecile. Arrogance comes with ignorance. So they start having these delusions as if we are a power that cannot be stopped and we can... It's not going to happen, and we will not have a ceasefire up until they withdraw. You need to understand that that's one of the first conditions of the Palestinian resistance, that they need to withdraw, and without withdrawal, you will not have a ceasefire. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another live stream. Thank you for everyone who participated. And of course, apologies I didn't reach all of your comments. Thank you so much, everyone who sent supers. Angela Brody, thank you so much. Alan Marwin, Sean Hurlin, Glenn Hoxley, and everyone else who participated. As usual, I hope I shed some light on the recent developments that are happening, and will continue to hopefully do so. In the meantime, stay blessed. Enjoy the rest of your weekend ahead, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone, and take care.